6 shots, nigga.
I count 2 guns, nigga. You said in 76 years on this plantation, you seen all manner of shit done to niggas. But I noticed, you didn't mention kneecapping.
Oh, God! Motherfucker! Desmond!
76 years, Steven. How many niggas you think you see come and go, huh? 7,000? 8,000? 9,000? 9,999? Every single word that came out of Calvin Candy's mouth was nothing but house shit. But he was right about one thing. I am that one nigga in 10,000.
You motherfucker! Oh, sweet Jesus, let me kill this nigga.
Still true is that there's still kind of a reptilian side of our brain, right? That part of our brain that if somebody looks different or sounds different, that there's a part of us that is cautious. There's still kind of a reptilian side of our brain.
The Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. And so we've come here today and finds himself in exile in his own land, and finds himself in exile in his own land, and finds himself in exile in his own land, and finds himself in exile in his own land, and finds himself in exile in his own land, and finds himself in exile in his own land, and finds himself in exile in his own land, and finds himself in exile in his own land, and finds himself in exile in his own land, and finds himself in exile in his own land, and finds himself in exile in his own land, and finds himself in exile in his own land, and finds himself in exile in his own land, and finds himself in exile in his own land, and finds himself in exile in his own land, and finds himself in exile in his own land, and finds himself in exile in his own land.
After the rebellion, there remained still a few human tribes who refused to participate in the rejection of their stellar spirits. In the sand around our council fires, we would depict each of the faithful tribes as a small circle. Around these keepers of the light circles, we would then draw one great circle to represent the Great Spirit who included us all. We knew ourselves as the Ongwe Honwe, which means the people true to reality. Due to our attunement to the original instructions of the Creator, and due as well to the energy amplification that we experienced through agreement among ourselves, earthly power was still very much in our hands. But some things cannot be coerced, and love for the truth is one of them. The cooperation of the egos had to be voluntary, or the human design would not work. Though we had the power to do so, eliminating the warrior tribes in some great battle, and thereby driving them from the earth, was not something we considered. Incarnate or disincarnate, the warrior tribes remained a part of us. Incarnate or disincarnate, we would continue to disrupt the emotional atmosphere of the collective consciousness that with them we shared. They would continue to disrupt. The physical level was the level on which the warrior peoples had fallen. It was the only level on which they could be made whole. Incarnate lives were required to teach them the folly of the fear motivation. Nothing but earth experience could bring them to a time when a core of them would again turn their hearts to God. Their passionate spirits remained essential ingredients in our future global species. We had to accommodate them. We gave them the land surrounding the sea that is today called the Mediterranean. Elsewhere we maintained our presence, but the warrior tribes were aggressive. They multiplied rapidly. Our way was to teach through patience and example, not through warfare and confrontation. So as millennia passed, and they took over more and more of what is today Asia, Africa, and Europe, we gradually withdrew. In the end, there were only 2 islands where we were able to maintain a constant presence into historical times. 2 islands, each an entire continent. Wild, uncivilized, as refreshing to us as the abundant fresh water that flowed living through their heartlands and rained amply upon their lush vegetation. Over these 2 continents we sustained a clear and protective vibrational field, which many tribes lived and prospered long after the rest of the human world had plunged into darkness and disorder. You of this present generation know little of what's transpired in these lands. There was no history, no written record. The people of the Verd tribes came and went off the face of the Americas without a single name being carved in stone, with no one with no one stone head being raised in arrogance to look out over the sea, with not a single human bone left to note them in the mother's soil, for they ascended, these tribes, and left no remains. The Americas, continents without turbulence, few records, few ruined cities, of all the earth's lands, will remain incarnate here the longest. There's lots of old giant pyramids and stone cities in America. After the rebellion, a certain amount of warrior energy had penetrated throughout all the fields of thought and emotion that surrounded the earth. But in the Americas, our continental auras filtered out the most turbulent of these influences. On those rare occasions when excessive fear motivation did find its way into the expression among our people, we would hold a meeting of the council. If the people were a danger to the sacred balance, they were asked to change their ways. If they refused, they were asked to leave. Those who left went willingly. They would not migrate back. They knew the decision of the council was fair and just. They knew that they had chosen behavior that was vibrationally incompatible with our continental emphasis. And so they would depart, either by boat or by the great ice bridge to the north. Those who left America to settle in the other parts of the world knew why they were being banished. If they preserved birch bark or buffalo hide records or maintained an oral tradition, their descendants knew that a time would come when they would be invited to return, when what was broken would be made whole again, when what was lost would be found, and when what was forgotten would again be remembered. Those of us who remained in America came and went peacefully, honouring our spirit selves, finding our balance with nature, living in harmony with the seasons and with each other. We were peace-loving tribes. We were not perfect, but we did not make a controversy out of every meal. We learned how to fill our needs in harmony with the earth and her creatures. We honoured the land on which we lived. We saw the animals as our sisters and brothers. The thrust of our creative interests was biological. We created fruit and vegetable foods, potatoes, corn, beans, peanuts, squash, melons, sweet potatoes, pumpkins, yams of many shapes and sizes. We created new life forms to interpret sound and light in new ways. Beautiful birds, intelligent creatures with whom we communed as fellow guests in the lodge of the Earth Mother. Our people knew spirits of the plants and animals as equals and friends. There was still trial and error among us, fine-tuning here and there, but we had the opportunity then to fine-tune. Most of the human egos in the Americas remained true. Through the spirits of gods were not fully incarnate in all. We were incarnate in many. We could keep the fear disease out of our islands as long as the human populations remained small, and collective human consciousness was not making itself felt on a planetary scale. However, the disease was part of our collective field of being, and the human populations, attuned to fear, grew rapidly in the millennia following the rebellion. The vibrational influence became stronger with each passing age. By about 2,500 years ago, humans had multiplied sufficiently to signal the distinct beginning of a global human consciousness. And, not surprisingly, the fear influences were felt more often in our lands. Our continental auras were weakening. Seeds of discontent began to sprout. I was one of a small group who took on the task of monitoring the growing influence of the warrior energy in the thought fields that surrounded the earth. When I saw the seeds of fear motivation begin to twist and warp the seeds of the values of key Central South American tribes, I verified what I had sensed. I knew the Europeans would soon be coming to American shores. I knew that we were approaching the cycle of purification, and that soon, in less than 2 millennia, there would be a single human world. Our period of continental isolation was rapidly nearing an end. Surrender all their fears into the fire that burns eternally in the sacred heart of God, that they could align themselves with the eternal love, become one with the Creator, and live there in peace, in harmony with each other and with the benevolent universe. With a benevolent universe. There was something I cared about more than anything in the world. I longed to see the human beings incarnate in the warrior societies forgiving one another, loving one another, and looking at things through the eyes of their spirits instead of exclusively remaining locked into their perceptions of their egos. I longed for them to come into an awareness of the magnificence around them, of their potential and forgotten joy. I called upon the highest good, and, because I was aligned with the Creator's intentions, when my statement was cut short, my prayer triggered a response from both heaven and earth. My call broke through to the highest levels of the spirit world. Others saw the spirit that I had perceived, and because it was a matter close to the heart of the Great Spirit, a context for healing, the most violent of the warrior tribes was, in that moment, conceived. Any time a statement is cut short in the earth walk of one incarnate, and there is a longing to complete that statement, as there was in my case, it represents a bubble, a potential culture. Like a yogurt culture or yeast culture, this one happened to become a new sort of human culture, complete with the manifestation of every positive as well as every negative potentiality. We have guided those who are open to us, musicians, children, and leaders when we could. Our historical behind-the-scenes presence has been obscured from human vision because historical people have no vision. They turn to their perception over others. They refuse to give credibility to any experience not easily put into words. They believe that if their native language does not have terms for it, if people do not speak of it, it must not exist. In effect, they let others do their seeing for them. They give away their power, because they become unwitting prisoners of a popular language-centered fiction. They do not even notice even a single angel, much less an entire species of spiritual guardians. Though we are ever present behind the stage props of their preoccupations. People paying more attention to what other people tell them than to their own perceptions is the beginning of civilization. It is the beginning of twisting, warping, influence that ultimately produces the shift in human orientation from the internal guidance of the Great Spirit to the external dominance by others. Civilization does not occur among healthy people. In healthy, non-historical societies, people are not overly concerned with other people's fantasies. They are certainly not manipulated through externally imposed descriptions of reality. In America, civilization was a step backwards. It is easier to flush toxins from the Earth's river valleys than to remove the toxic ideas that cause them from humans' minds. In the order of healing, it is human consciousness that must first change. At a time when the intelligence level among human beings has risen to unprecedented heights, almost to the very threshold of awakening, global telecommunication systems now keep human attention focused upon the problems that result from fear-centered ways of thinking. It will keep your attention focused on these problems until you solve them through the only act that can, a total departure from the entire warrior paradigm. This departure from the old ways of history has begun. Many are now aware of us. Our consciousness flows daily through the word processors of 1,000 creative thinkers. Our insights and perspectives are bubbling beneath the surface of a dozen of new movies, hundreds of new books, and thousands of new articles and popular songs each year. Humankind is linked in a single socio-economic community that now closely monitors all new potentially relevant information. Your present global civilization is rooted upon premises of separation from God, as flawed as any civilization that came before, but has dynamically accelerated our education of your race. It has increased human intelligence across the board. Hundreds of thousands of you are now about to understand something that 200 years ago we could only get through in bits and fragments to a few isolated individuals. Survival, cooperation, and new beings.
I'm so used to seeing what is depicted as an Indian within the movies, the old movies and things, so if you don't look that way, they don't expect you to be Indian. They think you're either black or Hispanic or something else, but most people don't perceive you as an Indian if you don't look like that poster type Indian that they have on TV.
someday.